What if everything you believed about your perfect marriage turned out to be a lie? How would you cope if a single moment shattered your entire world? My wife and I have been together for 29 years, married for 26. I am 51 and she is 49. We have two grown kids, a 24-year-old son and a 22-year-old daughter. We met in college, fell in love, got married, and built what I thought was a strong, happy marriage. We shared many activities, communicated well, and tackled issues together. Our careers thrived with mutual support. Our intimacy was still passionate, even if not as frequent as in our younger years. She works in IT and I run a landscaping company that employs 75 people, a business I started after graduation. Since COVID, she's been working from home more often. We talked about me stepping back from daily operations and her going part-time so we could travel and spend more time together now that the kids are grown. Looking back, I saw no red flags, no secretive texting, no guarding her phone, no changes in how she dressed, no odd behavior, no unexplained nights out with colleagues. She would go out with friends or family, and someone would always tell me I should have joined. I enjoyed her having her own time while I enjoyed solitude in my workshop. She always came home early, so when everything fell apart, it was a complete shock. Last week, I planned a surprise anniversary weekend at a friend's romantic bed and breakfast during the winter festival. I left work early to surprise her and told her to pack for a trip. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw an unfamiliar car. My gut told me something was wrong. I sat there hoping I was mistaken, but my instincts screamed otherwise. I sat there contemplating. Should I leave and confront her later? Pretend I did not see anything? I was shaking so much I could barely see. When I face tough situations at work, I tell myself to man up and deal with it. Suddenly, my shaking stopped, and I felt oddly calm, even though I was a mess inside. I quietly entered through the back door, and my black lab was lying there looking sad, not his usual excited self. I love that dog. He stayed put as I tiptoed up the stairs. As I reached the top, the sounds from our bedroom became clear. I approached the door, swung it open, and there he was, her boss on top of my wife. I paused for a moment before shouting, "Surprise!" The chaos that followed would have been funny if it were not so heartbreaking. He rolled off, trying to escape, but got tangled in the sheets. My wife kept shrieking, "Oh my God!" while trying to cover herself, but she could not because he was still tangled up. Eventually, he freed himself and started searching for his clothes, which were on the other side of the bed. It hit me that they were in the same spot where mine usually landed. I grabbed his clothes before he could. My wife was sobbing, repeating, "I am so sorry." I backed up to the door and stood there while he stood next to the bed, naked. I grabbed the large armchair from the corner, dragged it to the door and sat down. He asked for his clothes, but I refused and tossed him my wife's robe hanging on the door. He started to approach me. Now, even at 51, I am in good shape. At 6 feet 3 inches, 240 pounds, years of gym workouts and landscaping work have kept me fit. I looked at him and warned, "If you come any closer, it will not end well for either of us. You will end up in the hospital, and I will land in jail, so how about you just take a seat?" My wife was now weeping into the pillow, and he sat down. After an awkward silence, he asked, "What now?" I responded, "I honestly do not know." My wife's crying had subsided a bit, and she sat up. Eventually, I pulled out my phone and declared, "You are both going to spill everything while I record it." They exchanged glances, and my wife asked, "What do you mean by everything?" I replied, "Exactly that. Everything. How it began, how long it has been going on, when, where, hotel stays, dinners, the works, everything." My wife insisted this was the only time, to which I shouted, "Bullshit! There is no way you would be comfortable enough to bring him into our bed if this was not a long-standing affair. If you lie to me again, I am walking out that door and seeking a divorce attorney." She broke down crying again. For the next 10 to 15 minutes, the truth came out. It had been going on for over 9 months. It started with him flirting with her until he invited her to lunch, and she accepted. A few drinks later, they ended up in a hotel. She came home to me that night as if nothing had happened. She insisted it was tearing her apart, and she wanted to confess but did not know how. Once more I called her out. If it was tearing you apart, you would not have continued it so easily. They even attended a week-long work conference that I used to go to with her. She told me company policy had changed and spouses were no longer allowed. I pocketed my phone and the room fell silent again. Then an idea struck me. I rummaged through his clothes for his phone and asked for his passcode. Surprisingly, he gave it to me. I started looking through his phone. I found some photos of a woman I assumed was his wife and asked her name. Carol. She was quite attractive, though not as stunning as my wife. I told him this as I found more pictures of children. It turns out he has 3, and finally, a family portrait of all of them. I held up the phone and remarked, "A lovely family. Why would you risk it all for a fling with my wife?" His response, "What do you mean, risk it all?" Me. "Do you really think Carol will not find out?" "How would she find out?" "I'm about to call her right now." He stood up and protested, "No, you cannot." My wife screamed, "Please do not do this to him." I snapped, "Do not do this to him? You have destroyed me, our family, our friends, our future, and my heart, and you are worried about his well-being?" I was trembling again, trying to hide my tears, but I could not hold it together any longer. I slumped back into the chair and started crying. She tried to come closer, but I glared at her and said, "Stay away from me." After a bit, I composed myself and looked at his phone again. He begged me, "Please, I am begging you. I promise I will tell her." "Sure you will," I replied. He stood there pleading, as I found her number and decided a FaceTime call would be even more effective. She answered, looking confused, and asked, "Who are you? Is my husband okay?" "He is fine for now, but that is about to change." I switched the camera to show him standing there in my wife's robe. I said, "I believe you know this man. The room he is in is my bedroom. The floral robe he is wearing belongs to this woman," as I turned the phone to show my wife, who was trying to hide under the sheets, but it was too late. "That is my wife, and I came home early today to find them in bed together." I felt genuinely sorry for her and terrible about how I broke the news. She started crying and he tried the "Honey, I am so sorry, I can explain. It was just one time routine." I told her not to believe a word he said. "It has been going on for over 9 months, and I have spent the last 15 minutes recording all the details they were willing to share." I assured her I'd text her my contact info and that she should send me her email address so I could forward the video. I handed him his phone and overheard her warning him that a packed bag would be waiting outside when he got home, and if he tried to enter the house, she'd call the cops. She hung up, and I threw his clothes at him. Once he was dressed, he left, and it was just me and my wife. She looked at me and started crying, apologizing over and over. She said she never meant to hurt me and begged for forgiveness, claiming it was meaningless. All the usual cheater's excuses. I stared at her and told her to pack her things and get out of my house. I headed downstairs and poured myself a drink. I was sitting on the sofa when she came down the stairs. She started to approach me and I said, "Just stop." She asked if we could talk about it, and I responded, "Maybe, but not now." I told her it was going to be very hard not to see a divorce attorney, and she started crying again. She looked like she was about to say, "I love you," but I interrupted, "Don't you dare say those words right now because I don't think I'll ever believe them again." She cried even more as she walked out the door. Watching her leave, my entire world collapsing, I broke down and fell to the floor, shaking and crying uncontrollably. I don't know how long I lay there, but eventually, I managed to sit up, still crying. I called my best friend. I tried to speak, but the tears kept coming, and I couldn't get the words out. He asked what was wrong, but I couldn't answer. He asked if I was at home, and I managed to grunt a yes. He said he was on his way. Half an hour later, he was in my living room. I was still in tears. I handed him my phone with the video open, and he started watching. I couldn't bear to hear it again, so I went to make us both a drink. He came into the kitchen, took my drink away, and poured them both down the sink, saying, "This isn't going to help you." He insisted I couldn't stay there alone tonight and told me to go upstairs and pack a bag. I came back downstairs and he had my lab on a leash. We headed to his place. For those of you who commented on how great my friend is, his name is Dan, and I couldn't agree more. Our families are close, our children are friends, and we used to go on family camping trips together. Over the years, his wife Terry and my wife became close friends, which is relevant to what happened next. As we drove to his house, I was silent and Dan was getting angrier. When we arrived, He walked in and asked Terry, "Did you know?" She looked confused and said, "No, what?" He raised his voice, "Did you know?" I stepped in telling him to calm down and reminding him it wasn't her fault. He realized he was out of line and apologized to Terry with a hug. Now completely bewildered, Terry took my phone from Dan, who said, "Show her." I took my dog outside, not wanting to hear it again. When it was over, Terry came out in tears and gave me a long, comforting hug. She took my hand and we went back inside. The three of us spent the next hour or so talking and crying. My phone kept buzzing. It was my wife. I ignored the calls and deleted the texts without reading them. Then my son called. He was curious about what was going on because his mom was at his place with his wife, saying I kicked her out. I asked him, "Did she tell you why?" He said no. I told him to hand her the phone. She needed to explain. He asked why, and I said I'd send him the video if she didn't, then hung up. About 10 minutes later, my son called back, sobbing, only able to say, "WTF," repeatedly. I shifted from being upset to comforting him, assuring him it would be okay and that none of this was his fault. He calmed down and asked if I was all right, to which I replied tearfully, "Of course not." He finally said his mom would be staying the night and quickly ended the call. My phone rang again. This time, it was my daughter. I had forgotten I asked her to look after the dog while we were supposed to be away. She was wondering where Cooper, my lab, was. I told her plans had changed and we weren't going, but she could still stay at the house. Neither of us would be home tonight. She asked, "What do you mean neither of you? Where are you?" I told her I was at Dan and Terry's, and her mom was at her brother's. She insisted, "Dad, tell me what's going on." I said, "I can't right now. I'll come by the house tomorrow and we can talk then." She kept pushing, but I kept refusing. Eventually, she gave up and ended the call. I knew what her next call would be. I texted my son to give him a heads up. Then I called my wife, asking if she was ready to tell our daughter, or if I had to do it. She just cried. I hung up. After half an hour, there was a knock at the door. Dan let my daughter in. Seeing me in tears, she rushed to me, and we both broke down in a tight embrace. She didn't know why we were so emotional. When we managed to regain some composure, I called my wife again, telling her our daughter was with me. Once again, I asked if she was ready to break the news or if I should put her on speaker. My daughter chimed in, asking her mom to clarify what she needed to reveal, but all she heard was more crying. So, I decided to step up and end the call without revealing anything. I then dropped the bombshell. "I found out today that your mother has been having an affair for the past 9 months. Just when I thought my pain couldn't get worse, the look of hurt on my little girl's face brought me to my knees. She was shaking, too shocked to even cry. I was on the floor, a sobbing wreck, unable to move. I felt like I had let her down when she needed me most. I couldn't even muster the strength to move. Terry, with tears in her eyes, rushed over to comfort her, promising her that things would eventually be okay. Dan was also shedding tears. Like I mentioned, our families are close-knit. She finally released a heart-wrenching cry that will haunt me forever. I finally gathered myself and went to embrace them both. We eventually found our way to the couch, lost for words. I asked my daughter if she was going to be all right. She looked at me and said, "Dad, don't worry about me. Are you going to be okay?" I managed to croak out, "I'll cope." She asked if she could take Cooper with her to the house and if her fiancé Tim could come stay there. Naturally, I agreed. I was relieved she wouldn't be alone. After she left, Terry was furious, saying, "I can't believe she did this," and called my wife every name under the sun. She calmed down and grabbed her phone, saying she was going to call her. Looking at me, expecting me to object, I told her, "Go ahead, but put it on speaker." So she called, exchanged small talk, and finally told her that Mike, that's me, had called Dan in tears after she left the house, and now I was staying there. Terry knows everything. My wife starts crying again as Terry loses her temper. "What were you thinking? How could you do this? Why didn't you come talk to me before you went down this path? If something was wrong, why didn't you talk to Mike? You know how understanding he is. Do you realize how many people you've hurt? Our daughter just left here, and I can't even describe the look on her face when Mike told her. Dan and I will never see you the same way again. How could you be so selfish?" More sobbing from the other end, with my wife repeating how sorry she is. Terry just listens to her cry. After a moment, I asked Terry to hand me the phone. "Ashley?" No answer. I call her name again. "Ashley?" She finally responds, "Yes, babe." I retort, "You've lost the right to call me that." More sobbing from her end. "I just want to know, what are you truly sorry for? If I hadn't come home early, would you have realized the gravity of your actions? Or would you have continued sleeping with your boss after our trip?" More crying. "You're not really sorry for the people you've hurt, including your boss's family. You're just sorry you got caught." I end the call. Dan, Terry, and I talk a bit more while my phone keeps buzzing nonstop. I try to sleep but can't. In the morning, I ask Dan to drive me home, give Terry a hug, and tell them both how much they mean to me. I tell Dan I plan to go to my cabin for some alone time. He agrees that it's a good idea. As we're driving, I notice a message from my wife's boss's wife among the many notifications on my phone. She thanks me for the information and gives me her email address. I forward her the video and offer to talk if she needs to. It might help both of us. I pack up quietly, careful not to disturb Darlene and Tim. As I'm loading up the truck, I grab a couple of my .22 rifles. Dan questions me and I explain, "You know I usually do some target practice up there." "Not this time," he counters, taking them away. Cooper hops in and off we go. When we arrive, about 2.5 hours later, I open up the cabin and start a fire in the fireplace. Cooper and I take a walk in the woods. It's somewhat soothing, but not completely. My son calls to check on me and I tell him where I am. I say if his mother wants to stay at the house, that's fine, but she needs to leave before I get back. He agrees. After our walk, Cooper falls asleep by the fireplace, and I go out to chop some firewood. It's a great workout and surprisingly therapeutic. With each swing of the axe, I alternate between imagining my wife's face and her boss's. I stay at the cabin through Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. On Monday, I start making calls. First to my office, letting them know I'll be out for a while but can be reached for emergencies. Next, I call my lawyer, who recommends a divorce attorney. I schedule a meeting for Thursday. Then I contact the bank to put a hold on our shared accounts and cancel our credit cards, asking for new ones to be sent out. Being alone in the woods gives me some clarity about my next steps. I find myself trembling again, wondering if I should really go through with this or try to save our marriage. After I get home, I find this subreddit and start reading other people's stories. It helps, but only a little. Midweek, I go to the office and talk to my HR manager. We have a close professional relationship that's about to get more personal. I explain the situation and ask for advice on how to handle their company. She advises me to talk to my lawyer first. She asks if I'm going to get tested and recommends a doctor. I make appointments for Thursday. I meet with my new lawyer and show her the video. This time, I can actually listen. She shakes her head and says, "Why do people do such stupid things?" It turns out she has no tolerance for cheaters. Her husband cheated on her, and it was so bad she switched her practice to divorce law. She reassures me that everything will be okay, and I sign a contract with her. I ask about informing the other spouses and the boss's HR, and she says we should wait. Meanwhile, I've had a meeting with my wife. She's been staying at our son's place. At least she understands I need space and wasn't at the house when I returned. I've been sleeping on the couch because I can't bear to go into our bedroom. When I need something, I grab as much as I can to minimize the number of times I have to go in there. Thank you for sticking with me this far. It took forever to type this out, and writing about my daughter had me in tears for hours. I'll provide another update next week. Once again, I want to express my deep gratitude for all the advice and support I've received from this community. I owe each and every one of you more than I can ever repay. All I can do is say thank you and try to respond to all the comments. The support and encouragement have been incredibly helpful. Many of you have commented on the strength I showed during the confrontation, but right now I feel anything but strong. I'm just going through the motions. All the advice has been excellent and is helping me move forward. The reason for this post, and my original one, was because I needed help, and I got plenty. The reason my first post was removed was because it had too much storytelling and not enough requests for support. I'll try to keep this brief, but I believe details are important. I'm starting to accept that there's likely no coming back from this, and I'm almost certain of what my decision will be. Yet, I can't shake the thought that I'll be discarding 29 years of our shared life. Even now, I can't bring myself to type PX and still refer to her as my wife. What's wrong with me? Help! On D-Day, she ended up at our son's place with his wife. He called, confused about what was happening and why I had kicked his mom out. I told my son that his mom needed to explain everything to him, or I would. He knew I was staying at my best friend's place. My daughter, who was supposed to be dog sitting, came home to find no dog. Eventually, she showed up at my friend's house, desperate to know what was happening. I told her, and the pain on her face was even worse than catching my wife with her boss. It broke me. She took the dog and went to our house with her fiancé. On Saturday morning, I told my friend I needed to spend a few days at the cabin and asked if he could drop me home. He agreed it was a good idea, so I packed up, took the dog, and headed to the cabin. I spent time walking in the woods and splitting firewood. It was a good workout and helped clear my mind. I stayed until Saturday, then drove home on Monday. I started making calls to the bank, credit card companies, and a lawyer I use for business matters. He recommended someone, whom I called and met on Thursday. I played her the recording. She was confident, and I hired her. I asked about informing my wife's boss in HR, and she suggested we wait. Now I'm home, sleeping on the couch. I can't bring myself to go into the bedroom except to get clothes. On Friday, my son called and said his mom couldn't stay with them anymore. It was causing tension with his wife. Could she come back home? I hadn't spoken to my wife since D-Day. Reluctantly, I agreed. She returned on Saturday, and I went back to the cabin. It was freezing, but I managed. On Monday, I went straight to the office. Everyone loves my dog, and he gets spoiled there. I finally went home on Monday night. When I saw my wife, all I could see was her with her boss on D-Day. I don't think I'll ever get past that. Any suggestions? We didn't speak. I changed and went to my basement office to keep busy. Eventually, I watched TV in the basement. She came down and asked if we could talk. I told her I wasn't ready yet and asked her to leave me alone. While she was there, I fell asleep in the recliner. I woke up early, went to the gym, showered there, and went to work. My routine is to go home late for the rest of the week. On Friday, my HR manager checked in on me. I told her about recent events and my therapist visit. She suggested I stop sleeping on couches and chairs and buy a new bed. I thought it was a great idea. I withdrew half of the joint account funds, which was my wife's share, and bought a new bed. The delivery was scheduled for Saturday. I waited at the office for the call that they would be there in 30 minutes. I stopped to pick up a couple of subs for the delivery guys and waited nearby. When they arrived, I met them, treated them to lunch, and gave each of them $1.25 to do me a favor. I asked them not to haul away the old mattress and to come back later to pick it up. I asked them to lean it against a tree near the street. They looked puzzled, and I told them to give me 5 minutes and come in. They would understand. I thought about burning the old mattress in the driveway, but decided against the cleanup. I went upstairs and stripped the bedding. While doing this, I decided to make a statement. I took a can of Blaze Orange spray paint and wrote, "Wife cheated on me in our bed," in big letters. The guys came in, and my wife asked what was happening. I told her I couldn't sleep in that bed anymore, and that I bought a new one. She seemed upset but retreated downstairs. The new bed was set up, and the guys left the old mattress where I asked. After a while, she informed me that they left the old mattress in the yard and that they would be back for it. I responded, trying to keep a straight face. I don't think she realized yet, but the entire neighborhood certainly did. On Valentine's Day, she tried to be romantic and initiated intimacy. I rejected her, saying I wouldn't take her up on the offer even if she were the last woman on earth. She argued that we don't just have sex, we make love, her voice full of distress. I countered that we haven't made love since she started sleeping with her boss. She looked shocked. Did she think I'd forget? I can't understand her thought process. I decided it was time to talk and asked her to sit in the living room. I asked what she wanted to do. Should we try to mend things? Or should we divorce and move on? I'm not sure why I even suggested trying to fix it. I guess I'm struggling with the idea of throwing away 29 years. Please convince me otherwise. She said she was willing to do anything to make things right and begged for my forgiveness. I told her she needed to confess to everyone in our family, starting with her parents and my mom, including the details of how I found out. Our kids don't know this part yet. They're visiting tonight. I'll update you on how that goes. That's where I'm at now. I'm still in shock and constantly fighting the urge to confront her boss. I need advice. When will things start to get better, or is this my new reality? Update. That evening, my mom, My dad passed away 3 years ago. Her parents, her sister, and brother-in-law all came over. We all settled in the living room, and I made sure to sit as far away from her as possible. Everyone started with comforting words like, "What's wrong? We love you. Everything will be okay," thinking someone was seriously ill. I glanced at her and said, "This story isn't going to tell itself." Her dad looked at me, and I could tell he sensed something terrible was coming. To her credit, she tearfully confessed everything, including how I walked in on her and her boss in our bed. After a long, uncomfortable silence, she pleaded, "Somebody say something." I responded, "What are they supposed to say? That you're a terrible person, that you've hurt me more than you can imagine, ripped my heart out, thrown away 29 years and ruined our family? Not to mention the damage you've done to his family. Was the sex really worth all that?" I just kept going, letting all the anger, hatred, and betrayal I'd been bottling up pour out. I didn't know I could be so harsh. Her mom finally said, "That's enough." My wife agreed she deserved it all and ran upstairs crying. Her mom tried to follow, but her dad said, "No, leave her alone. She needs to suffer for a while before this can get any better." We chatted for a bit. They offered their support and told me if I needed anything, just ask. I told them I've been seeing a counselor and think I'll be okay, but appreciated their offer. I said that despite everything, I still love her, and she's going to need them more than I do. I went to bed and slept better than I had since D-Day. The next morning before I left, I went into the guest room and saw she hadn't slept and had been crying all night. For the first time since D-Day, I believed the gravity of what's happening had finally hit her. Telling her family and having me lash out at her like I did seemed to snap her out of the affair fog. She looked genuinely remorseful. I told her we needed to talk. More like I talk, she listens. I explained that I'm 99% leaning towards divorce, but I'm still clinging to the 1% hope that there's a chance. She said she'd do anything, just to please not do anything yet. I reminded her of a story I told her when my dad died. When I was 17, my dad shared some wisdom with me. You'll face tough times in life, but how you handle them speaks volumes about your character. Never make crucial decisions when you're upset. At the time, I brushed it off with a casual, "Yeah, Dad, whatever." I started to tear up as I said how much I wish he were here so I could tell him that I was really listening. She got up and hugged me. I didn't reciprocate, but it felt comforting, which unnerved me. She sat back down, and I told her she needs to move out. I can't heal if I see her every day. We need to go no contact. She agreed and asked what else she could do. I told her I was too emotional to think straight now, but would let her know. On my way to work, I called my lawyer and arranged to meet her that day. She was free, so we met for coffee. I updated her on everything, the 99% versus 1% dilemma, etc. I asked her to prepare divorce papers in case I decided to proceed. She suggested that if I could afford it, I should find an apartment for my wife and pay the first month's rent. This would demonstrate good faith if things went to court. I agreed, and she said she'd have something for me to review by Monday. I called a real estate broker we've worked with over the years, explained the situation and what I needed. He referred me to a rental agent. The agent found a suitable place, and I met with the property manager to pay for the rest of February, March, and the deposit. When I got home, I told my wife about the apartment, what I'd paid for, and that she needed to meet the manager and sign the lease. It's a 6-month lease, which seemed like a plus. She was surprised by how quickly I'd acted. I told her that I needed her not to come home from our son's place. While she was gone, I arranged for movers to come on Saturday. When she got home, I told her about the movers and asked why she hadn't asked about finances. I informed her that I'd canceled the credit cards, withdrawn my half from our joint account, and canceled the debit card. She seemed angry but admitted she didn't blame me. It turned out she hadn't needed to spend anything, as she'd been splitting her time between our son's place and home. She also revealed that she'd requested a leave of absence from work due to personal issues. They allowed her to take her paid vacation first. On Friday, I told her she could take whatever she needed for the new place. Just leave me some essentials and nothing from the basement or any family heirlooms, and my new bed. I also told her I was open to marriage counseling. She should find 3 different counselors, and I'd choose the one I thought was best. I left early on Saturday morning and returned to a half-empty house, including the TV. That's okay. I wanted a bigger one anyway. My friend still had my liquor, so I stopped by to pick up my favorite bourbon and enjoyed a glass while typing this. Sorry this was so long. Thanks for reading this far. Tomorrow I'm hitting the gym, making my favorite chili, and buying a new TV. I'm sure I'll have more to post in the future. Thank you.